Well, Connor McDavid is the consensus best player in the world. Make no mistake about it. Leon Draisaitl is the frontrunner for the Hart Trophy.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday, Christmas Eve edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's show, the counting stats speak for themselves. The defensive stats speak for themselves. And of course, a juicy old narrative. So this is one of those takes that if you are not watching the Oilers on a nightly basis, like I am as the host of Locked On Oilers, or like most of you all are as listeners of Locked On or watchers of Locked On Oilers, you might take this as homerism. You might take this as me being biased towards a player on the team. And first of all, I want to say, I understand. So much of the sports media take industrial complex is utter nonsense. It is bait looking for reactions to garner engagement, to eventually parlay that into something, whether it's advertising, whether that's getting your product or your company bought by a larger conglomerate, what have you. So much of the airtime, of the hot airtime, as I like to call it, is dedicated to nonsensical opinions that aren't based on fact, opinions that are based on emotional reactions to try and garner a specific type of reaction from the audience that's viewing it. And if you're not an every game viewer of the Oilers, you're going to see the headline, the title of this video or the title of this podcast episode, and you're going to ask, is he serious? You know, this is a team that has Connor McDavid on it, you know, the best player in the world. How is he not the Hart Trophy frontrunner? Well, being that you asked so kindly, inquisitive listener or watcher, it is important to understand that not all production is created equal. First of all, that's why we talk about context so much. We talk about things like line mates, deployment, quality of competition. We talk about all of that. It's why we talk about what your responsibilities are. You know, who are you most commonly out there with on the defensive end of things? You know, how much can you realistically expect from this person in the role they're in based on all of the parameters around them? You know, and I think the simple matter of the fact is Draisaitl is playing at the highest level of his entire career. I know this is a player who's won the Hart Trophy previously, but you watch him on a nightly basis. You look at the underlying numbers, which we'll get to in our second segment today. But when you add up all of the elements of Draisaitl's season so far, first of all, this is a consensus top 10 player in the world. I think coming into the season, if you had him any lower than 10th, I don't think you were being fair. I think based off the playoffs last year, the 31 points in 25 games, the series against Vancouver, where he had a little bit of a hard time defensively, but was able to carry those stats back to the even side of things. You think about Draisaitl in his career. It's really hard to be the best player on any other team. Like if Draisaitl were on pretty much any other team, you know, if he were on Colorado or Toronto, maybe it'd be a little bit different as far as like, you know, the 1A, 1B situation. But being the shotgun rider for the best player in the world, it's not an easy job. Draisaitl doing what Evgeny Malkin has done forever in Pittsburgh, and frankly, I this might be a hot take. That this I can't verify off the top of my head. I'd have to do some research, but I feel very strongly that Draisaitl is more talented than Evgeny Malkin. I think Evgeny Malkin has had a great career. I think he's the best 2C of the 21st century when you look at the context of the role he played on three different Stanley Cup winners, the Hart Trophy he won when Sidney Crosby was out for that entire season with a concussion. But Draisaitl is on another level from that. And look, some of that is environmental. You know, the NHL, it's a lot easier to score now than it was 10 years ago. You know, I always point to that Jamie Benn season with 87 points winning the Hart Trophy. And you think about where we're at now, where we'll see somebody hit the 70 goal mark at some point in the next few seasons. I don't think that's out of the question. I think realistically, you could probably see someone hit the 80 goal mark. That is not entirely out of the question over the next 5 to 10 years based on where the game is going. Getting smaller, it's getting faster. And Draisaitl right now has the most goals in the league. He has 24. He's got, I believe, a 1-goal lead on second place. He is second in points behind Nathan MacKinnon, and he is shooting the puck a little bit more than he did last year. If I remember correctly, I'm going to click over to my notes here. So right now, he has 24 goals. He has 52 points. Goals, he's first. Points, he's second. If he were to play at the current pace he's at, just on goals and points, not based on the percentages, which we'll get to in a minute, he would finish the year with 58 goals and 125 points. So going under the hood to a layer lower, so far through 34 games, Leon Draisaitl has 174 shots on goal. If you were to scale that out, which I did, that comes out to 251 shots on goal over the course of 82 games. So far this year, Draisaitl is shooting 23.1%. That would be a career high. Draisaitl's career average is 18.4%. So I would realistically expect that shooting percentage to come a tick down or two, probably close to 20%. Even if we're going to say he's going to have a career year, that number is probably going to be closer to 21.5 than it would be 23. And then on top of that, if we know that he's on pace for 251 shots on goal, we can use his career average of 18.4%. And for the record, 251 shots on goal is a little more than 30 than he had last year. And then if he were to have his career average shooting percentage of 18.4 on 251 shots on goal, that would come out to 46 goals. The thing is, because he's shooting at a higher percentage than he in years past, that's why he's on pace to get close to that 60 goal mark. I don't have an affirmative position on what he's going to end up with. I think 50 is certainly within reach. He's at 24 and they're not at the halfway point yet. I think Draisaitl, simply put, if they can get on one of those power play heaters, I think he'll have a really good shot at pushing that 55, 60 goal mark, which seems about what it would take to finish first in the league with Austin Matthews missing significant time. He's out again on Monday. He missed a few weeks from November to December. You have all of that. You have the counting stats. And lest we forget, Draisaitl's doing this with his most common line mates is Kasperi Kapanen and Vasily Podkolzin, and doing it with elite defense, which we're going to talk about in the next segment as well. But you have a guy you got off of waivers in Kapanen a month ago when you had injury issues. And then you have Vasily Podkolzin, who came in to start the year on the fourth line with Derek Ryan and Corey Perry. And you have found two really nice fits to play with Leon. And look, ultimately, and we talked about this on yesterday's show, ultimately, you're probably going to see Arvidsson and Skinner get more cracks in the top six than Podkolzin and Kapanen, just because of the investment the Oilers have in the former two as opposed to the prior. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair to Kapanen and Podkolzin, but there's an expectation that they're going to kill in their minutes. And don't get me wrong, we're about to talk about it in our next segment. They are killing in Draisaitl's minutes. So we're going to take our first break of today's show. When we come back, we're going to go under the hood. We're going to talk about the underlying numbers for McDavid and Draisaitl together. We'll talk about them separate. We'll talk about the defensive metrics, which are so great. And then in the final segment, we're going to hit on why the narrative is here this year. Be right back. Today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you love sports, you're going to love PrizePicks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your other favorite sports, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the action. You can win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away up to $30 million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. When your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. This week's on PrizePicks, we've got special football on Christmas Day. pretty good games for that matter. You could do something like Patrick Mahomes over 1.5 passing touchdowns. You could do something like Lamar Jackson over 1.5 passing touchdowns, and so much more. It's so simple to make picks and have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly. PrizePicks. Run your game. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Christmas Eve edition of Locked On Oilers. Tomorrow, we will have a show for you on Christmas Day. So if you're traveling, if you're heading out, you're going to see family, you're going to see friends, I'll definitely be able to keep you company in the car, on the train, or on the bus, or your bike, or however you plan on getting where you're going. So lest we forget that content keeps going no matter what. And around the holidays, it's a good time to take stock. I talked about this on yesterday's show, just savoring the opportunities you have to spend time with the people you care about. We all say we want to do better, we want to do more, and the holidays are a good inflection point. They're a benchmark in your timeline. And with this time off, from games, the Oilers don't come back till the weekend. We're going to have 5 days of void in the hockey newsmaker cycle. The hockey news cycle typically starts in one of 3 places. It starts on Daily Faceoff, it starts in The Athletic, or it starts from an aggregator, somebody who's listening to radio or a podcast who clips a clip, throws it up on social, and that's really where we start our conversations. In different walks of life, you have different origin points for topics of conversation, and typically speaking, newsmakers are the ones who drive the conversation. In sports, it's typically a general manager saying something, a coach saying something off the record that's attributed anonymously, and that gets the cycle going. And look, I understand there is a non-insignificant contingent of the hockey world that does not like Leon Draisaitl, that thinks he's dramatic, that thinks he's maybe a bit of a dirty player, that thinks he's abrasive and unhelpful with the media, and they're never going to take it seriously when I spend this much time talking about why he deserves to be the MVP. But if you go under the hood and you look at these goal splits away from McDavid away from him, you look at who Draisaitl's doing it with, the defensive results they are getting that are such a ringing endorsement of how they've been playing. And it's really not that difficult to make this argument. We have certain benchmarks as far as our expectations for what an MVP season looks like. So we're typically going to say somebody who's close to the top of the leaderboards in goals and overall points. We're going to say somebody that's on a playoff team and a team that has a real chance of doing something special in the postseason. It's very infrequent that you see someone win a singular award in hockey that isn't on a team that makes the playoffs and isn't on a team that's pretty good. You don't see Norris Trophy winners on teams that don't make the playoffs all that often. Adam Fox did it a few years ago in that weird 56-game season where he won the Norris Trophy on a team that didn't make the playoffs. But for the most part, you need to make the playoffs. You need to be on a pretty good team that has real cup aspirations, and you need to have the counting stats. We've established that Leon's going to be well within the parameters. 125 points, it's more than enough most years to have you in that top 5. I think if he leads the league in goals or is first or second in goals, I think that's a strong case for him. And then number 2, getting over to these underlying numbers here. So number 1, in Connor McDavid's ice time without Leon Draisaitl, he has a negative goal differential. It's only 20-17, but I do think it's worth pointing out that McDavid in the non-Draisaitl minutes this year, so when he's been playing with Hyman, with Nugent-Hopkins, and with Kasperi Kapanen as of late, they have a negative goal differential. And look, by the end of the season, I expect that to be on the positive side. They have the majority of scoring chances, the majority of expected goals, the majority of high danger chances. Their their save percentage in the McDavid minutes without Leon is probably the biggest cause for optimism that that's going to bounce back. An 864 save at 5-on-5 is ridiculous. That number is going to come up, and that goal split is going to be on the right side of 50 by the end of the season. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if we got there probably before the All-Star break, in all honesty. And then in Leon's minutes without McDavid, he has 56% of the goal share. He has more expected goals. He has more high danger chances, and with 6.2 shooting percentage on ice. But again, when we talk about context, we say 6.25 on ice shooting percentage. But remember, in the minutes Draisaitl's not playing with McDavid, he doesn't have Bouchard and Ekholm with him, so lower quality shooters for defensemen. He has Podkolzin and Kapanen as of late, but there's been Arvidsson in there in spurts. There's been Jeff Skinner in there in spurts. And all three of those guys, Arvidsson, Kapanen, Podkolzin, and Skinner, all four of those guys have had below their career average shooting percentages, which would lead you to believe that there's a little more meat on the bone there. But the counterpoint, of course, if you were trying to like game this out and work the math out as to potentially bouncing forward, positive regression versus negative regression, Kapanen and Podkolzin are not great shooters. You know, those are not guys who have what you would consider an above average shot. I want to say Podkolzin's career shooting percentage is below league average, if I remember correctly. This season, it's 5.9%. His career average is 9.3. But this isn't someone who shoots a lot. You know, he has more shots on goal registered this year than last year. And frankly, if you add up Podkolzin's previous 2 seasons in Vancouver, you're going to get 61 shots on goal. He has 51 shots on goal already this season. I don't know where his shooting percentage is going to end up. You know, he's at 5.9 right now. I don't think it's a stretch to say he could probably get that number to closer to 8, and that would help bump up the overall on-ice shooting percentage for Draisaitl. And then as far as Kapanen's a bit more interesting, because frankly, I don't know if the Oilers are going to keep him long-term once they have a more filled lineup. But in the 14 games Kapanen's played as an Oiler, he's got a 17.6 shooting percentage. Of course, that's high. His career average is just a shade over 10. But when you look at that, all of those numbers in conjunction, you know, you look at the on-ice, you look at who Draisaitl plays with, you talk about the defensemen that shoot, you talk about the forwards, it makes sense that shooting percentage is only 6 something. And I think there's room there for that number to probably be closer to 8 or 9, frankly, than where it is right now at 6. And that would lead me to believe they can get even better underlying results, especially if you look at the high danger and the expected goals. But of course, you know, if we're talking about lower quality shooters taking a bulk of the shots, they're going to naturally have a lower shooting percentage. You know, the great shooters in this game, they are able to convert lower quality chances. That's what makes their shot, their release so dangerous. It makes them such quality hockey players, is the fact that they have an outlier trait. And in that case, it's a hard shot. But the one last thing I want to get in here before we take our second and final break, the underlying defensive numbers are outstanding. You know, 1.82 goals against per 60, 2.14 expected goals against. 38.9% of Leon Draisaitl's ice time this year has come against elite competition. 17% better than league average defensively if you go by Evolving Wild's expected goals metric. That is a quality defensive profile for somebody who has had his defense held against him a lot in his career at various points, as far as saying, you know, he doesn't put in as much effort as you need. He takes bad penalties. He occasionally can get outside of himself because he gets frustrated, because he's got a bit of a rugged demeanor. But make no mistake about it, Draisaitl's putting together a really strong defensive season. And I know he's never going to be seriously considered for the Selke Trophy because of narratives, the way that works. But I would be remiss if I didn't say this is that caliber of defensive season so far. Of course, plenty of time remaining this season. You know, the Oilers have played 34 games so far. There's plenty of time for those numbers to come back closer to what Draisaitl averages for his career. But he's put together a really, really special first 34 games. And it's not an exaggeration to say he's been better than McDavid so far this year. So we're going to take one final break on today's show. We're going to dive into the narratives of winning the MVP right after this. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's never too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways to pick up a W. You can do player props for touchdowns, receiving yards, receptions, how much each team will score. It is a whole lot of fun. This week in the NFL, we've got two pretty good games on Christmas Day. The Chiefs going to the Chiefs going to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, where the Chiefs are 2.5-point road favorites. And then later in the day, Lamar and the Ravens heading down to Houston to take on the Texans, where the Ravens and Lamar, the two-time NFL MVP, 5.5-point road favorites. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone hanging out on this Tuesday, Christmas Eve edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are making the case as to why Leon Draisaitl is the Hart Trophy frontrunner right now. And like we said at the end of the last segment, there's a lot of time for things to change, for the environment to change. But right now, I don't think there's an argument for anyone else on any other team. You know, if you want to get into the weeds, we could make an argument for Quinn Hughes on the Canucks, because when you look at his splits when he's away, when he's not on the ice, the Canucks are basically an ineffective hockey team. And when you have that level of impact as a defenseman, I think you deserve to be highlighted. You know, I don't think anyone on the Devils or the Hurricanes is worthy of that consideration, at least yet. You know, Jack Hughes certainly could get hot and insert himself in that conversation. And that is where we're going to start this part of the episode. Part of winning this award is having a driving impact on your team's overall success. You know, you look at the Hart Trophy winners of years past, and it's really straightforward. There is a certain expectation for what your team looks like. You know, I'm looking at it now. Last year, McKinnon, the Avs made the playoffs. They lost in the second round, I believe, if I remember correctly. 2 years ago, McDavid won it. 3 years ago, Matthews. The last time a player won the Hart Trophy without making the playoffs, I don't think has happened this century. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm looking at these names down these lists, and I'm pretty sure none of these people actually, I'm pretty sure all of these people at least made the playoffs in their respective season that got them this award. And I don't necessarily think you need to be on a playoff team to prove your value. You know, this was a really contentious argument last decade in baseball. I think it was 2012. It might have been 2013, where Mike Trout, you know, one of the great players in the history of baseball, elite defender, 30-30 speed, 30-30 home run power, and Miguel Cabrera, who one of the best hitters of his era, one of the best hitters of all time, didn't play defense well, and Mike Trout was a better player. Mike Trout had a more well-rounded, more valuable season, and the Angels didn't make the playoffs. The Tigers did. And Miguel Cabrera won the Triple Crown for his offense. But when you look at the defensive value, the base running value, Mike Trout did more for the Angels. You know, Mike Trout's worth to the Angels is more than what Miguel Cabrera's was to the Tigers. And I think there's been years where you could make that same argument. You know, I allude to Igor Shesterkin's 2021-2022 season all the time. Austin Matthews won that award. Shesterkin finished third in the voting that year. And I think, frankly, Shesterkin to the Rangers that season was more important than Matthews to the Leafs that year, because the Leafs have other bona fide elite players. You know, for as much as Marner and Nylander get ostracized for their perceived softness, their lack of clutch playoff moments, those are both two of like the 20 best players in the entire world, and they're on the same team. You know, the Rangers, it's a little bit different when you're talking about Shesterkin in relation to Fox and Panarin, because when you have your best player as a goalie or a defenseman, it's really hard to get taken seriously when we're talking Hart Trophy, because there's a perceived value commiserate with those positions. You know, it's almost going to be impossible at this point for a goalie or a defenseman, frankly, especially a defenseman. You know, Carey Price won it not that long ago, where it's still relatively within recent memory, but there is an expectation that you are on a very good team. There is an expectation that you are going to be one of the top 5 in points and goals. You are going to be the driving force. You probably are going to play good defense. It's not necessary to play good defense if you have the counting stats, because we're talking about such rarefied air as far as the counting stats. We're probably never going to see somebody win the Hart Trophy with less than 100 points, barring some dramatic reconfiguration. If the league clamps down on certain things, wants more defense, wants to clamp scoring down a little bit, there are plenty of paths they could use through rule enforcement or maybe changing dimensions of the net, the zones, whatever, that they could create more defensive opportunities. But you are going to need 120 points. You should be good defensively, but frankly, as we saw with Erik Karlsson on the Sharks a couple years ago when he won the Norris, he was bad defensively, and he still won the trophy because he scored 100 points as a defenseman, which hadn't been done in 20 some odd years. You have the narrative, you can make something happen. Draisaitl as the 1B to McDavid's 1A, Draisaitl having a better season, being a 50-goal guy who's also an elite passer, who's having an elite defensive season, while doing it with Vasily Podkolzin and Kasperi Kapanen. You add all that up, and it's almost like ignorant how good of a season Draisaitl's having right now. And I'm very happy for him, frankly. I always feel that we talk too much about wins and losses when we're talking about player evaluations, because ultimately we care about the postseason. We care who wins the Stanley Cup. We care about who has the moments. And look, sure, would Draisaitl have liked to have done more in the playoffs last year, especially later on, in the Cup final or the conference final? I guarantee you. I guarantee it. But when you look at those underlying numbers, when you look at what Draisaitl was able to accomplish in the postseason over the last handful of years, we're talking about one of the best playoff performers of the era right now. You look at it, he's got 120 points in 82 career playoff games. He clearly has that ability to raise his game, to get to that higher level. And it's something you can't take for granted. And I'm sure McDavid's going to go on some crazy heater at some point. He'll put like 15 points in 9 games on the sheet. He'll catch up to everyone else. I know he missed the 2 weeks back in November, but this is a team that has one of the best players in the world to complement the best player in the world. And I hope Draisaitl gets the recognition he deserves for the season he's having. Now, there's so much time left in the year. I won't definitively say Draisaitl's going to finish top 3. He's going to win. But if they were giving out the award today, I have no doubt in my mind that what Draisaitl is doing is the most impressive. The quality of his line mates, the quality of competition, the underlying results, the actual results, what he's on pace to do, all of it paints a picture for a Hart Trophy caliber season. It's simply incumbent upon Draisaitl to maintain his production, to keep grinding away at it, and to keep playing great defense, because that's an important component to this. It's adding another tool to your toolbox as an elite player, and that's something the media will eat up and get you the Hart Trophy. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. We'll probably do what I would give each player for Christmas. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys then.